What single human has done the most damage to the progression of humanity in the history of mankind? Sheikh al-Islam. I heard of this guy after hearing someone on TV complain about how this man set the Islamic world back by centuries. In 1515, the age of the Ottoman Empire, he, a learned scholar of the kingdom, issued a decree that forbid printing, press, and made using it punishable by death. Purportedly, the unnamed inventor of flexible glass, vitrum flexile, brought a drinking bowl made of the material before Tiberius Caesar. The bowl was put through a test to break it, but it merely dented, rather than shattering. The inventor repaired the bowl easily with a small hammer, according to Petronius. After the inventor swore that he was the only man alive who knew the manufacturing technique, Tiberius had the man executed. He feared that the glass would devalue gold and silver, since the material might be more valuable. Bakhtiyar Khilji, hands down. In 12th century there was the world's biggest university in India named Nalanda, where intellectuals from all around the world used to study. Then Turks invaded India under Khilji. They killed almost all the intellectuals and destroyed the university, and they burnt the library. The library continued to burn for 3 months. This has to be by far the biggest loss to mankind. Cyril of Alexandria is a pretty good bet. He organized murder squads to go around Alexandria killing anyone who wasn't a hard Christian. This included nearly every great mind of the era. One in particular was Hypatia of Alexandria, one of the greatest minds in history. She invented a working steam engine nearly a millennia before the first steam locomotive. He is of course considered a saint by Catholicism and the Church of England. Edit. It was Hero that invented the steam engine. Chill y'all, I just woke up to 100 damn replies. Her writing did survive, just not intact. Much of it within the treatise of Theon. Her father a great astronomer in his own right. Wikipedia is not infallible. Thomas Midgley Jr. He played a major role in development of tetraethylene, leaded gasoline, which went into mass production throughout the 1920s. This invention meant that the blood lead content in developing children rose, causing numerous problems, including cognitive issues and physical growth. It was also noticed that the rise in blood lead content matched with violence in adolescence in multiple countries. Midgley is also accountable for the discovery of chlorofluorocarbons, CFC, specifically Freon, which as many know had a drastic impact on the ozone. As of October 2020, the ozone hole above Antarctica sits approximately 23 million square kilometers, 8.9 million miles. Although these two inventions seem insignificant compared to more drastic actions taken by other single humans, it's the widespread impacts that his inventions had and are still being felt today, even though both leaded gasoline and CFCs have been banned. Peas. The last invention made by Midgley actually killed him. It was to help him maneuver and get out of bed with the use of ropes and pulleys due to him contracting polio, but he got stuck and eventually his invention strangled himself. I would suggest Andrew Wakefield. His work Ilio-lymphoid nodular hyperplasia, nonspecific colitis, and pervasive developmental disorder in children has been directly responsible for the mistrust of vaccines, the decline of Western rates of vaccination, and basically telling everybody that there's a boogeyman underneath your bed. He is directly responsible for thousands and thousands of deaths. He's a scientist who made a mistake. Why are you blaming him? Exclamation mark. It's not that he made a mistake. He had purposely customized the outcomes to meet the hypothesis so that he could get rich selling safe vaccines and diagnostic kits. He poisoned the well that saved so many people just so he could get rich. I have no idea how he can sleep at night. Bakhtiyar Khilji. The guy who destroyed Nalanda University, which was one of the oldest and most fascinating educational places in ancient India. The library kept burning for 6 months. Just imagine the amount of knowledge those books would have and how much impact they could have in the modern world. Thomas Midgley Jr. Almost everything he invented has seriously harmed humanity. With his inventions, Thomas Midgley Jr. contributed to the poisoning of 3 generations of children, increased the risk of skin cancer and other skin problems related to exposure to UV rays, and contributed greatly to global warming. Emperor Gaozong of China. This is kind of an obscure story, so let me tell you the whole thing. It was the 12th century. When people talk about how China used to be the most technologically advanced part of the world, this is the period they're talking about. Some historians that they were on the brink of industrializing. Then Manchuria invaded and conquered northern China. The imperial court retreated to the south and declared Gaozong, the emperor's brother, as the new emperor. China's top general Yu Fei, who, according to some records, literally had patriotism tattooed on his back, though that might have been made up by someone who wanted to emphasize how unfair the rest of this story is, rallied his army and defeated the Manchus, and was raring to chase them out, but he gets orders from Gaozong to back down. because he'd rather negotiate. These negotiations end up signing away the north half of China. A few years later, the Manchus invade again. Yu Fei beats them again and pushes all the way back to the old capital, Kaifeng. Then he gets the order to retreat. He responds with a letter saying that he's got the Manchus on the ropes, and he can reconquer northern China in like a month. No, says the emperor, retreat immediately. Eventually, Yu Fei does retreat, but he delays long enough to evacuate the city first, making up some logistical issues as an excuse. At this point, you may be wondering why Gaozong was so reluctant to push an advantage. The answer is that his brother was still alive. The king of Manchuria liked to bring him out once in a while and make fun of him. If Yu Fei reconquered China, he might liberate the rightful emperor, and Gaozong would be out of a job. As such, Gaozong was actively trying to throw the war, and he interpreted Yu Fei's delay at the end of this war as meaning that he had reached the point of at least considering going rogue. So as soon as Yu Fei got back, he was arrested, and promptly executed on treason on the ground of affair. He might have done something, presumably because the optics on the actual charge almost winning a war we wanted to lose were too bad. People realize that this is bull quickly enough, and there are protests, but Gaozong manages to pin everything on one of his advisors and placated the mob by executing him. So how does this affect the long-term progression of humanity? Well, as I said, China might have been on the brink of industrializing at the time, but didn't have access to enough coal. There are coal deposits in China, but they're all in the north. Second, the Manchus never really got their internal issues sorted out, and 70 years later, were easily conquered by the Mongols, who then recruited a bunch of disaffected Chinese siege engineers. This essentially removed the one weakness of horse archer hordes: they're not good at taking fortresses, and allowed them to wreck half the world. Had China been united at the time, and had been ruled fairly recently by a guy who had, if you recall, been taken prisoner by invaders from the north, so you can bet the defenses would be fairly well maintained, they probably could not have done this. So had it not been for the malice of this one man, the Mongols would probably never have become the juggernaut they eventually did, and the Industrial Revolution might have happened about 500 years ahead of schedule. That monk who glued a page of geometry and algebra together to write prayers on it instead set the world of maths back about 300–400ths of a year. Sir Mark Sykes. This man was the British element in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. For those of you not in the know, 100 years ago the Middle East was an area that did have some nations and some more tribal areas, so people were more divided by language and culture, some by religion. France and Britain decided to carve up the Middle East into easier to govern territories, but fumbled this task and instead divided the territories on the map over these religious and tribal lines. Not only has this been a main contributing cause of conflict in the Middle East, if you take two opposing or rival groups and then suddenly group them as one country, what do you expect? But said conflicts have then fueled further conflicts again and again. This has then been further used by Islamic extremists as a reason to hate the Western powers, as they were the ones who created this terrible agreement. Even Sykes himself accepted that the agreement's wording should be changed in order to give those countries autonomous rule. What is a little sad is he actually seemed to want to help these regions with the agreement, but just bumbled the whole thing, which has led to most of the issues the Middle East has to this day. Sykes didn't make the modern Middle East though. He just played a large part in creating the circumstances in which its current problems thrive. Imagine all of the advancement, education and collaboration that could have happened had the Middle East been allowed to flourish unhindered and without resentment. Yongle, emperor of the Ming dynasty in China, ordered the fleet of Zheng He, the greatest trading and exploration fleet of the time, to be burned during his reign in the early 1400s. This was the beginning of an era of isolation for Chinese kingdoms, which ultimately led to the collapse of Imperial China, and indirectly to the rise of the PRC. Additionally, the wealth of the world overall decreased as a result of reduced trade with China, and if China had continued exploring, it is possible that they, not Europeans, would have colonized North America, instead of merely maybe discovering it then telling no one as they did in history. It may not be a significant alteration of human progress, but it's one of those events that sets the world in a definitively different direction. Genghis Khan. While he personally didn't do much to hinder human progress, his reign began an era of Mongol expansionism and devastation, and his successors were responsible for the destruction of the House of Wisdom of Baghdad, ending the Islamic Golden Age, and not to mention the destruction of numerous cities and the deaths of many. Also, the Mongol Empire eventually paved the way for the Black Death. The empire led to many trade routes being formed between Europe and Asia, which eventually led to the transmission of the Black Death to Europe in the 14th century. Guy de Chauliac. He was a surgeon in the 1300s who vehemently spoke out against another fellow surgeon, Theodoric Borgonani. Theodoric was a surgeon who wrote about his theories on proper wound care and believed that the best thing you can do to a wound is wrap it and keep it clean. Guy hated what Theodoric was writing because it directly went against the teachings of Galen, an ancient Greek surgeon who believed pus was the body's way of balancing your humors. Guy's teachings were widely accepted, and it's believed that his ignorance set the development of antisepsis in surgery back about 600 years.
Like, subscribe, and check out our TikTok for more content. See you next time!